Subscribe to GovExec Plus on YouTube and stay informed on the latest in public sector news, insights, and thought leadership. Scan the QR code now or search for GovExec Plus on YouTube.
Hi, everyone. I'm Courtney O'Neill Allen, Director of Events Content at GovExec, and it's my pleasure to welcome you to today's program, Cyber Threat Intelligence in Practice, Maturing Threat Intelligence for Proactive Cyber Defense, presented by GDIT and Palo Alto. Cyber Threat Intelligence, or CTI, is becoming more critical for government agencies as cyber threats become more sophisticated and the battlefield edge becomes more digitized. Government agencies must balance between modernizing their cybersecurity maturity models while also maintaining a proactive posture, not just in reacting to threats, but also being proactive in identifying risk early. Early detection not only stops cyber threats in their tracks and prevents future attacks, but it also improves threat hunting capabilities and bolsters our nation's defenses. Today, you will hear real-world insights from some of the country's leading cyber experts driving organizations maturing cyber threat intelligence capabilities. We'll find out what's working, what's challenging, and what lessons others can learn. So joining me here is Dave Henchman, the Director of IT and Cybersecurity at the Government Accountability Office. Hi, Dave. And in studio here is Mr. Aaron Bishop, the Chief Information Security Officer at the Department of the Air Force, along with Dr. Misha Beckett, the Federal Civilian Deputy Chief Information Security Officer and Director of Cyber Threat Intelligence at GDIT. And last but not least, Mr. Jamie Williams, the Principal Threat Intelligence Researcher for Palo Alto. Welcome, everyone.
Hello. Thanks for having us.
Thank you. So to get us started, would love to get the perspective of both GAO and the Department of Air Force. Dave, I will start with you, and then Mr. Bishop, if you don't mind weighing in. How have you seen the role of cyber threat intelligence, or CTI, evolve over the years, and particularly in terms of how it informs our daily or your daily operations and long-term security planning?
Sure. Well, I think we have a unique perspective at GAO in that we look across the federal government during the course of our audits. My group happens to be IT and cybersecurity, which is what our focus is. And increasingly over the last couple of years, there's been an emphasis on that cybersecurity part. And specifically to your intro, I think it covered really what are the hallmarks of this journey the federal government's on. It's this move from reactive to proactive, and not just AI, but just the increase in technology sophistication has really allowed agencies to take a step back and rethink how they approach cybersecurity. It's not just, oh, well, we got hit by someone, now we need to figure out how to get our stuff back. It's really what they're doing to predict where that next attack is coming from and plan accordingly. But it also has required a rethinking about how I think an agency's cybersecurity function is organized so that you're better accommodating these new technologies and thinking about how these new processes are going to affect how you do business. And I think long term, it's really driving agencies to, as I mentioned, rethink about how they do strategic planning. They now need to think about, okay, well, we're modernizing this technology infrastructure. What do we need to do to make it robust enough to accommodate future technology growth downstream so that we can continue to keep our systems safe, continue to keep our infrastructure safe, and also continue to deliver on citizen services?
That's a great perspective and take on this. Mr. Bishop, I know you had a perspective, especially from the department. Explain.
Well, first I want to say thank you for having me today.
Absolutely.
And I agree totally with Dave about how we would love to get more proactive on leveraging CTI for the benefit of our cyber warriors. One of the things we need to think about is how do we move to that point you were describing, which is proactive. How do I get the threat intelligence for our engineers when we harden and build a solution, as well as our operators who are defending from a SOC and a monitoring perspective? Do I see that activity we were looking for? Being able to leverage different sources of CTI in order to get curated data, primary data, customized data, et cetera, and bring that together and apply that so that our warriors can say, wow, we don't see this, or we did see it, and share it among our government friends in order to say, this is something we need to watch out for.
Wonderful. So you highlighted that your sources are varying, right? And so you have to make sure you're using some proper discretion to identify what's a good source versus a bad source. That being said, Misha, I want to point to you. What are some of the biggest obstacles that you feel organizations are facing right now, moving to a more proactive approach as opposed to reactive? And from your perspective, how does CTI bridge the gap?
Sure. So I'd point to a couple obstacles. I think many agencies are still struggling with some of the basics in terms of inventory, HVAs, really understanding your landscape and your infrastructure, being prepared ahead of time before an incident happens, as well as data overload. And I think it makes it hard sometimes for agencies to imagine shifting to a better CTI focus when they're still feeling overwhelmed by hygiene and some of the basics. I also think seeing the value of CTI beyond simple indicators of compromise and looking at it a little bit more strategically and holistically, by which I mean, what threat actors are interested in my organization? What did they think the high value assets are? Because that might be different than what I and my frontline defenders think. And so really looking at it from that perspective can shift us from indicators of compromise, which are really inherently reactive, to thinking about what are the crown jewels? What does the adversary want to achieve? Where is their attention ultimately going to land? That mindset shift can help start flipping us to a more proactive approach and less responding to a bad IP or domain name.
That's really interesting, and I like the connection between you two, talking about the warriors on the battlefield, the front lines. Dave, I know you had some examples that you maybe wanted to share of use cases, right, where intelligence and modernization really come together. Could you share more about that?
Sure. So, and I think Misha teed this up perfectly for me. So, thank you very much. Internal to GAO, while I don't work on our internal operations, our CIO has talked about this. We are a data-driven organization. The amount of data that we gather from the up-team federal agencies we're auditing at any one point, that we're processing, that we're analyzing, that we then turn into the 60 or 70 reports that we issue every year, that's all prime material, right? That's what we worry about, what we have to safeguard. Agencies trust us with the data. What can we do internally to ensure its safety as well? And so we use tools to track anomalies. We look to block malicious activity. And I think it's helping us move to a more proactive approach. Certainly, we're one of the agencies that I would argue is perhaps guilty of being reactive for a long time. And so we're trying to change our mindset to think about how we can be a little bit more proactive. But I think external to us and the work that we do across the federal government, there are a lot of use cases. I think a great example, if anyone can do this, go to GitHub, look up the AI use case inventory from 2024. It's about 2,300 entries, I think. And if you do a word search on cybersecurity, you start to see all these examples of all these tools that agencies are deploying so that they can get a better control over what's happening within their organizations. I agree with Misha that some agencies are further along this journey than others. Others are really just starting to get hold of the ABCs and understand and develop basic cyber hygiene. But there are others that are taking a more advanced look at this. I think Department of Homeland Security is a great example. They're really looking at how they can leverage this advanced technology to stay ahead of the bad guy, to be predictive, to be proactive, and consequently to help better defend not only their own agency, but also the role that DHS plays protecting the nation's infrastructure.
That's really insightful. So, Jamie, turning to you, do you have any best practices that you could share with organizations for integrating CTI into their existing SOC operations?
So exactly as we've already discussed, that flip from reactive to proactive is really an embrace in CTI production, recognizing that cyber threat intelligence is not a product, it's a process.
Interesting.
So like most things in life, it gets back to planning. And I'm a big fan of, rather than collect all the data, try to find a neat story, find impact, and drive forward that way, instead reverse engineer. Visualize, what does good CTI for us look like? And again, to your point about maturity, that could be indicators in a firewall, that could be strategic reports to brief to a general or decision makers. But really starting from that embrace of intelligence is decision support. So as an organization, who are we supporting? How are we supporting? How do they speak? How do they meet on Thursdays? Do they meet once a month? Do they want a tap on the shoulder? Do they want a pretty memo? Whatever that end state is. And then I can work from backwards of, okay, to get to there, what data do I need? What kind of analyst do I need? What kind of specialties do I need? The analogy I always use is like a restaurant. If you're starting a restaurant, you don't go out and buy every ingredient, buy the best chefs in the world, throw them in the back and pray for the best. You're going to end up with a buffet. Versus, okay, let's look around the restaurant. Who's sitting down? What do they like? What are they ordering? That's going to tell me my supply chain. That's going to tell me the appliances I need, the process, the timing. All that's going to make a lot more sense just based on that commitment to the process.
It's a great analogy. Mr. Bishop, going back to you. So we touched on this a little bit briefly, but talk to me about the internal sources. So you have internal telemetry, commercial feeds, open source data, and interagency intelligence. How do you parse through all of that, evaluate like what's most important?
I'd like to answer that building on what Jamie said. The maturity of the CTI is not just the process of CTI, it's how you apply it, where you apply it, the process of that application of it. I mentioned earlier about engineering and getting that threat intel early, so they're building toward a more resilient solution rather than just build it and then now what. We talked, Jamie talked about SOC and talked about what we do in monitoring side. All of that has to be worked together to mature each of those areas. When you talk about the type of CTI intel that's available, you can get a vendor-specific intel feed for particular product that they have and what's the issues with that. But you can also get open source information. You can also get curated and paid for intel feeds. In the government, we have some customized feeds that we use in our world. Bringing all that together is where the magic starts to happen, because if you try to lean on one over the other, then you can get false positives, you can get hallucinations into where you want to go. And then we want to apply modern technologies to help us navigate all of this technology. And that's where Dave was talking about using AI. Well, I look at AI as an umbrella term. Are we talking about remote product automation? Are we talking about machine learning, both supervised and unsupervised? Are we talking about LLMs, large language models, or generative AI? How you use that is important. For instance, if I collect logs on 1,000 applications, it's going to be a lot of data to go through. Do I want an analyst who's hard to come by, who I have to train, sitting there going through all that data? No, I want to have a supervised learning method to go through it, looking for anomalies to bring to that person's attention, so that person can then say, no, that's something we need to catalog as normal, or no, it's not. That's something we need to now go process, and we can get there faster and move the 0 day to exactly that 0, and not have to live with a 0 day for a long period of time.
You're helping tee up some future questions. Thank you so much. Jamie, going back to you, and I think we kind of already somewhat answered this, but why is it so important to distinguish between high confidence, relevant intelligence versus the noise? Like, what's on the other side of that noise?
I think the answer is in the question itself. Is there's so much noise in intelligence. There's, in any given day, there's new actors, new malware, new strains, new campaigns. So really it gets back to, as you said, reverse engineering from what is the so what? What am I looking for? What can I actually act on? Versus these are just neat stories that will distract our analysts and put us down the wrong road, bias us towards making, impractical or inefficient decisions. So again, I think it's, knowing who you are, what are you trying to do, and what does that success look like? And even if it's starting very, very small, if we're just doing, we're just looking for known vulnerabilities. Simple. Let's just get really good at that, build that process, build those connections. Because I think the bigger thing that we've seen is that process also impacts culture. where again, decision support is a business and organizational aspect. So you want your leaders, you want your admin, you want your engineers, your warfighters to think, before I make the final decision, what does Intel say? Can this be more threat informed? That shift doesn't happen overnight, but it happens through that proactive approach of where are these decisions being made, and are we putting the right information in front of those decision makers to best guide them?
One of the things I worry about is as that we focus on the CTI from that perspective, then we're having every single individual, hey, I want to go check myself against threat intel to make sure that I'm informed before I make the decision. If we chase after threat intel and we only make our decisions based on threat intel and not do critical thinking, we end up walking down a path that looks common to the threats. And all of a sudden now the threats are realized rather than us doing solid protection. And now I'm speaking from a cybersecurity perspective rather than a CTI specific perspective. Is we need to think holistically about it. It's very important, very informative, but we can't just depend on it only as the only way to do cybersecurity. And I don't want to lead the audience to believe that, because that is a false security and threat intelligence saving the day.
That's a great point to make. So with that said, I feel like this is a perfect segue to talk about some of the things we've already highlighted, data and AI. Much like using the chatbots, right? It's only as good as what you put into it. So talk to us, Mr. Bishop, about the impact that has on cybersecurity implementation, data and AI.
So I'd be naive to say it's not making an impact. It absolutely is making an impact. And as I said earlier, I'd like to see it become helpful in us to minimize the mundane and get to the real important things that we want to focus on with our limited resources. And I think that's the word I'd like to leave behind is prioritization.
Okay.
If we can use the AI and we can use the threat intel in such a way that we can prioritize our time and efforts, we'll be in a much better place. And that's the way I look at having to use it. If I don't do it that way, then we're spending a lot of time, money, resources, and chasing what?
Right.
Don't know. And that becomes problematic because there is not an infinite amount of time, money, and people to do cybersecurity.
Awesome. So to Mr. Bishop's point, it's AI and data is more than a catchphrase. So Dave, from a GAO perspective, what mechanisms for accountability should agencies consider when using AI and becoming more part of CTI or their CTI operations?
We care about traceability. When we come into an organization, our sort of rule of thumb as an auditor is, can I grab your documentation set you have, sit down with it and understand what you're doing without having to talk to you a whole lot? And so I think that gets back to what we've talked about, right? You need to start planning for this from the get-go. You can't retrofit this. You can't do it after the fact. It just doesn't work that way anymore. You need to think differently about your organization. You need to think differently about the jobs people do, how they do their job. And so that comes to understanding the impact that this is going to have in your organization, understanding the requirements, whether federal, local, state, within your agency, or the regulations that you have to adhere to. I think that's a really important part of this. And then you have to design process flows and workflows around this that make sense, that take into account what this new technology offers. How does it help you? How does it hinder you? What do you need to think about to change for that? And then finally, I think, part of that is, do you need human in the loop? At what point do you need human in the loop? Because I think at the end of the day, you want to think about how, if you're asked, you could trace any bit of information as it moves within your ecosystem. No matter where it goes, even the most ancillary little bit that ends up getting stuck off somewhere and nothing ever happens to it, can you trace where that goes? Because as auditors, lots of times that's what we come in and want to understand. Where is this information moving? Where does it go? Do you have the processes and procedures documented so that you can bring on new people and they can quickly and easily understand what it is they need to do? Or do you need to spend a lot of time and energy upskilling them or reskilling them for this? And so I think from the auditing perspective, those are the things that we really encourage agencies to think about. Especially in regard to AI, the way I describe it, the federal government's journey is just beginning. Yes, there is a lot of AI being used right now, but in terms of, I think, really true adaptation, this is all just starting out. And so these are the things that we talk to agencies about when we go out, and these are the things that we're hearing about And I think the other thing that hasn't come up is that it's important to partner well as a federal agency. Agencies shouldn't be doing this themselves. They generally need help doing it. And that's a great opportunity to spend the time and energy in the beginning to find a partner who can deliver on your expectations. And similarly, from this industry side, make sure you're partnering with a federal agency that wants what you can deliver, so that you don't have misaligned expectations. And I think that's just a hugely important part of building in the accountability so that you have accountability throughout the deployment cycle, throughout the operational cycle, and which gives you the traceability and the auditability that we would like to see if we were to come in after the fact.
Let me stop one important
Go
point. I love that point, and that's something that we see is AI and generally automation is a force multiplier. So exactly to Dave's point, it's not going to lead the way. It's not going to find patterns and do its own. You really need that planning and direction of, here's a repeatable workflow that makes sense based on our data, based on our outcome. Let's apply these technologies to really scale and really see those optimizations versus just letting it loose and seeing what happens. And I know, Dave, you're going to love this word. The big thing we focus on is governance. Do you know what the AI and technology is doing? But also, do you know where the data is coming from and where it's going? Because a lot of the threat attack surfaces that we see exposed from AI is we're using these tools, we're using these features, but I'm not necessarily sure where this data goes. Is it being used by, third parties? Is it being dumped somewhere? Where are we storing it? What, auditability and traceability requirements do I have? A lot of these questions, again, are very, very new, but I think it traces back to have a plan and execute based on that vision.
That's really awesome. So Misha, we have been talking about the importance of being prepared, right? On the back end, it's super critical to cyber threat intelligence, but there's still non-believers out there. So for those that are just thinking about, their strategies in a reactive posture, what do you think, or what can you share with us that's the potential impact on not only national security, but also just day-to-day operations for organizations when that 0 day does come?
Sure. So, a 0 day is like kicking a significant incident response into fast drive, right?
Okay.
And the vulnerability landscape the last couple years is getting more and more challenging. They're coming fast and furious. The time between sort of publication, exploitation, folks, using this in the wild is shrinking, and AI is going to keep that shrinking faster and faster. So it's a time game in a lot of ways. How quickly can you analyze and manage this? And the organizations that are not in good shape with regard to internal incident response and vulnerability management procedures and vulnerability analysis that uses CTI as a stream to inform that, you're way behind the 8 ball, right? The adversary breakout time, so how long it takes an adversary from the point that they've exploited a vulnerability till they start moving laterally, spreading compromise in your network, is in minutes, right?
Wow.
And that continues to shrink every year by many kind of industry, private sector measures. So you're setting your organization up for sort of a world of hurt.
Yeah.
And I think we tend to be fairly narrow in how we think about national security sometimes. But, my private sector company, Jamie's private sector company, we handle data in support of government customers. We touch things that are really important for national security. So do all kinds of small and medium-sized businesses out there. And so I think the reality is that we all play a much bigger role in national security than we tend to think because of the folks we talk to and the data we touch. And we have to take that really seriously when we're preparing for 0 day or any other kind of incident response.
So relationships between industry and government are really important, and also preparedness, to your point, but staying up with the times, so to speak, right, is necessary.
I think one of the things that we always forget is, at its core, cybersecurity is a human-on-human aspect. So as an Intel nerd, one of my favorite things about CTI is I think we very often talk about the data and the impressions, and we were talking about the capabilities, and what are these actors capable of, but it's also thinking about the human behind the keyboard. What is their motivation? What is their intent? And I think as you think about that human aspect, you realize humans are pretty easy to predict. They're very prone to patterns. That are prone to that worked. I got great feedback. I'm going to do it again. Reinforcement schedules, all those things we learned in philosophy class. So it's fun because, again, to your point about that flip between reactive and proactive, it starts to make sense. You see those data points, and even if you're not predicting things perfectly, it kind of leads in a certain direction where you can get at least a little bit ahead of your adversary just by understanding who they are and what are they trying to do.
So the human factor is also a critical point. It's not just about the tech or the tools or the solutions. You got to have a person behind the keyboard. So with that, thinking about cross-agency and cross-sector collaboration, Dave, what comes into mind as far as like best practices that are helpful for agencies today?
Well, I think that there have been a lot of federal efforts to improve the situation. It was probably not great a couple of years ago. However, with the rise and sort of like maturation of cyber incident reporting, federal sharing of reports about that, the building of, for instance, the CISA vulnerability catalog, and also efforts to harmonize federal cybersecurity regulations. GAO is doing some work on that right now, trying to help the Congress better sort of sort out all these regulations that have grown up over time and create complications for everyone about who do I report to and when and what do I do and how long do I have. And so I think or an important effort to sort all that out. And in terms of improving, I think from our perspective, we always want to see more collaboration. It's something the federal government isn't great at. It's hard to reach across departmental dividers. It's hard to build these sort of organizations that really get about and sort of work towards a common good of better sharing of this information. Things are improving, so that's great. But I think there's always room for improvement and to think differently about different avenues and mechanisms that the government can use to make sure that this information is out there and it's accessible to as many people as possible. And I know there was a big to do this spring when it looked like the funding for the CISA CVE catalog was going to run out, and they fixed that for a year. And now they're thinking about, okay, well, what's a more stable long-term approach? I think that's going to be an important part of this, as well as people just knowing these resources are out there. What can you do to contribute to that? How can you use this as a reference, something to help strengthen defenses on your end? And I think it's a lot of things that are evolving as the threat matures, as the threat becomes more advanced, and will continue to, right? As the federal government makes one change, the bad guys make a change to adapt to that. And so we change. And so staying on top of that, being proactive and having a lot of good people who think a lot about this and how they can better address the threat will be an important part of what the next couple of years will be like.
Mr. Bishop, so you're right there at the edge of the battlefield. What adversarial trends that are emerging or tracking right now that you think agencies should be aware of?
I would answer that by saying that as the Department of the Air Force, we're 222 facilities around the world. 183 of them are mini cities. They literally have housing, fire department, police department, and airport. And they have all these things in the facility that we have to maintain. And when you're talking about threat intel, it's not just about an IT system. It's about OT. It's about all the other aspects of being able to operate in this interesting paradigm. And we partner with everybody in the Joint Force, and the Joint Force partners with all these other countries as partners and allies. So we're sharing data, we're informing each other about it, and what we're seeing in trends is the volume, like everybody's been talking about, is the volume continues to go up.
Right.
It goes up from a vulnerability perspective, and I think that will continue from a perspective of we're doing more on the software bill of materials and the hardware bill of materials to understand what is the componentry of everything we're buying and building. That exposes, that awareness allows us to say, well, it comes with inherent vulnerabilities. And then over time, more vulnerabilities are found. So I think that's trend is only going to get worse.
Yeah.
Then the other side of the equation is the different kinds of attackers that we see range from script kiddies to criminals to nation state actors for against the Department of Defense. And what we see is there's no shame in using any of those vulnerabilities. If they can get access to data, that's what they want to do.
Right.
So for us, being able to share, using it properly and prioritize is the key for us, and we've got to get really good at it.
I trust in you, Mr. Bishop.
Appreciate it.
And to that, and unfortunately, that's all of our time, believe it or not. But thank you so much for being here. It sounds like there's a few elements involved. It's listening to your folks on the front line, those battlefield warriors, re-scoping the culture and the way we think about cyber threat intelligence and security, and then trusting or having good intel and data to rely on. So thank you so much for all of you being here. And as you all can see, this conversation is really just getting started. We're scratching the surface of the digital battlefield and the journey of the nation's cyber defensive strategies and evolution. We hope you walk away from the discussion with a renewed appreciation and curiosity in threat intelligence, data sourcing, and governance, along with applicable strategies for strengthening your organization's cyber defenses and cyber threat intelligence. Thank you so much to our underwriters, GDIT and Palo Alto, and a special thanks to our audience for tuning in. I'm Courtney O'Neill Allen for GovExec TV. Have a great day, and we'll see you next time.